All right. Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I will be your host for today. We're really excited for today's event. It's going to be a really good one. We've got an awesome group of classrooms who are just starting to tune in with us, both on camera and live via YouTube, joining us from across Canada, pretty much coast to coast. And we couldn't be more excited to be hosting more events in partnership with the Gord Downie and Downie Wenjack Fund. So the DWF is part of musician Gord Downie's legacy and embodies his commitment and that of both the Downie and Wenjack families to call Canadians to action in solidarity with Indigenous peoples of this land. So the goal is to continue the conversation that began with Downie Wenjack's residential school story and to support the reconciliation process through awareness, education, and action. So today is Gord Downie's birthday, which is why we wanted to make sure that we had an event to celebrate his life as well as his legacy today. So we're thrilled to have Jesse Thistle joining us today. Jesse is a Métis-Cree-Scot Ph.D. Candidate in history program at York University in Toronto. He also teaches there as an assistant professor. While his past life included struggles with addiction and homelessness, he overcame these challenges to become a Trudeau Scholar, a Vanier Scholar, and was awarded a Governor General Silver Medal in 2016. So a chance meeting with Gord Downie gave him an opportunity to share the work that he was doing, and this led to becoming the Downie Wenjack Fund's first author to join as the Artist Ambassador Program. So his latest book, From Ashes, was voted as one of the best books of 2019 and a CBC Canada Reads finalist. Jesse, it is so awesome to have you joining us live today. We're so excited to get to know you a little bit better, and then we're going to give the classrooms a chance to fire away at you with some questions.
All right. Hi, everyone. How are you doing? Thank you very much for that introduction. It's an honor to be here on Gord's birthday. Really, I grew up listening to the Tragically Hip. I've followed him along since I was very young, in my early teens. And so to give back to this really important cause is kind of cool. It's like coming full circle from the life that I lived. I'm a lot of people look at me and say that I'm a really decorated scholar. I'm a professor. I'm a best-selling writer. A lot of these, are really big things for anybody to achieve. And then when they hear my backstory of how I grew up without my Indigenous identity because I was adopted out, and then how I ended up involved in homelessness and in the justice system, it kind of takes them aback, and it's hard for them to see the person that I was, a long time ago. Uh, and that's common for a lot of Indigenous people to grow up without their identity because they've been placed elsewhere. Most famously, people understand the residential school system in Canada where Indigenous kids were placed elsewhere, which is what happened with Wenjack Channy when he was a young boy. But there was a different process that happened during my generation called the 60s scoop, where kids were taken and placed elsewhere. I was lucky, I ended up with my grandparents, but they still couldn't teach me what it was to be Métis-Cree, and I just didn't learn anything about that from where I grew up in suburban Brampton. Uh, I tried searching in school and around with people that were around, but back then there just wasn't a lot of information about Indigenous peoples in the curriculum. So that's part of what I do now is I try to help educate. I'm a teacher at university, and I try to bring our families and people's history to classrooms like I'm doing now, and share that so people have an understanding so that we can work together uh, through what's called Wakudawin. That's what we call helping each other in a good way. And part of our Wakudawin is to know each other in our history and share them so that we can be strong together. And those are teachings from my ancestors passed down through my elders. Um, but it kind of, being part of this foundation happened kind of by accident, just like my book, just like a lot of my life. Um, I was out at a soccer game in 2017 in May, Toronto FC. I'm a big Toronto FC fan, and my wife texted me while the game was finishing, and she said, "Don't go home. Don't go home. Come to the Danforth." and meet me here at this place where I'm having a bite to eat with my workmates. And I was like, okay, sure, whatever. She didn't tell me why. And when I got there, she was talking with Gord Downie. They were in conversation, and Lucy had met him the day before, oddly enough, at her work at Evergreen Brickworks. That's my wife, Lucy. And she had told Gord of my life and the work that I was doing and educating. And he called me over, and I sat down with him, and I got to talk with him for like 20 minutes. He was the nicest man. Totally not like he was famous or like I had imagined him to be. He was just a really down-to-earth guy who cared. And he explained to me the Downie Wenjack Foundation, the work that he was doing around residential schools. And I thanked him. I said, it's a hard job, to get the nation to care about what happened with Indigenous peoples. And, and he's like, I might not get it right, but I'm trying, and I found that really, really opened my heart, because I could see that he knew that it needed to be done, and I wish a lot more Canadians felt that way. They had the courage to try, and I think that's the most important thing. And sometimes we might get it wrong a little bit, but the point is that we're trying, and we're working with Indigenous peoples to get our family and our histories out there. And yeah, and I gave him a hug. He kissed my wife, and we sat there, and it blew my mind. I took a picture, and I didn't really realize how special it was because of how easygoing he was. And yeah, it was like meeting a legend. And so, I carry Gord in my heart. I listen to his music now, and it has a different tone. And it's been kind of a whirlwind in my life since then. When I saw Gord, I was just a scholar. I was just a MA student who was working his way through a PhD and to a PhD. And when I got accepted for my PhD, I won all these major awards, and that caught a lot of media attention. And people came to do a story on my academic successes. And I told the reporter about my past life, on the streets and with addiction issues. And he did a story, and then I got contacted by Simon & Schuster. And that's a publisher, and they offered me a major book deal. And so I put my life experiences into this book, and it's now a bestseller. It's been on the bestseller for 26 weeks straight. And it's #1 in the country right now. And in the process, it got selected for something called Canada Reads, and this is like the biggest thing that can happen to a Canadian author. This is like where on CBC, they have a show where a panel of celebrities choose a book, and then they defend it. Mine is being defended by George Canyon against 4 other amazing authors. And I'm nervous because it's broadcast live, and they're going to defend and pick apart and try to see which book Canadians should be reading in it. And the book, really, the theme this year is about uniting Canada as a nation. And so a lot of my themes of dispossession, the way that my family lost our land, the Indigenous issues, co-align with what's going on at the Downie Wenjack Fund. And so it's kind of apropos that I'm here talking to you about my book in Canada Reads on Gord's birthday. It's just all come together in this wonderful tornado. And I'd like to open the floor and talk some more, whatever you want to do,
Yeah, absolutely, Jesse. So it's an awesome story. I mean, I think Gord has had a huge role in a lot of Canadians' lives. And I can remember concerts, hip concerts, some of them stretching over 2 hours long. And it was just, for those 2.5 hours, time just didn't have any meaning. You were just sucked into the showmanship and what he was saying. And so it's pretty amazing experiences. And I think a lot of Canadians can relate to that. And I really love what she said, kind of quoting Gord, that he may not be getting it right, but he's trying. And I think that's so important. I think some people might give up before they try, but, having that courage to try, taking that big step. I mean, look what it did. Look at what he was able to do with the last few years of his life. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah. And, I find most fantastic about that. My wife at Evergreen Brickworks that day, saw a bunch of young kids, and they were like, oh my God, there's Gord Downie. And they didn't know his music. They didn't know the hip. They only knew him for his work around residential schools. And I'm like, that's so beautiful. You know, he's touching a different generation in a new way that's going to have such profound change for our country, you know. And that really like blew my mind, because like I know him from the hip, right? Like most Canadians, but they know him in a different way, a different capacity. So that's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we start meeting some of our classrooms, I want to maybe toss a question or two in your direction. And I think the first one that I'd like to ask is about, growing up. So, your book deals a lot with some of the struggles that you did face. Was there a turning point? Was there one moment? Was it a collection of moments? What kind of made you think that something has to change? I have to take a different course.
Well, it was when I was on the streets. I had a serious infection in my leg, and I thought they were going to have to take my leg, amputate my leg, because I just couldn't care for myself properly because I didn't have anywhere to live. And in that, I realized that I didn't have control of my life anymore, you know, and that like there were so many systems arrayed against me. I had to change. I had to do something drastic. And so I, that's when I kind of decided to change. I still got in trouble and I was still suffering after that, but that was the moment where I really knew I was out of control and I had to change. And with that desperation came an open heart, right? You can only go forward when you hit rock bottom, and that happened to me in that moment. And it's been an upward climb ever since, but I learned to persevere through that. And through that perseverance, through choosing better for myself, I learned how to learn properly. And that's guided me all the way through my rise through academia, you know, those tough times on the streets.
Yeah. So writing a book about that kind of memoir, was that difficult to do? Were you hesitant to kind of share everything, or did you just kind of approach it as, all right, this is my blank slate, I'm going to tell my whole story here?
Yeah, I knew that if I didn't tell everything and I held back, that it wouldn't connect. You have to put it all on the table. You have to go for broke. You have to, like Gord said, you have to try. And part of that was just like letting go and telling everything, and not fearful of the consequences, because you know I only have one shot at this. And if I don't tell my story correctly with everything in there, then it's not going to connect. And so I just went out like guns blazing, you know. I just put it on the page and let people decide for themselves. And the reaction has been beautiful. It has connected. So I guessed right.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I mean, your story is impacting so many people. So yes, you definitely took the right path. And I think it's going to help a lot of people too. So I think that's another amazing benefit of telling the whole story, is you're going to help a lot of people across Canada. So that's awesome. And that leads me to one more question before we meet our classrooms. I'm thinking about the Downie Wenjack Fund. So you're the first author to be an artist ambassador, which is pretty amazing. That's awesome. And I was wondering maybe if you could share a little bit about what your role might be in that position.
My role in this position is to reach people and like humanize a lot of the Indigenous experience, right? Like just by talking and meeting, you realize we're real people with histories, and we're resilient people, and we overcome. And part of that is building relations. You know, like I said, we need to repair a lot of broken relations in our country. And I think that by going into classrooms and speaking to students, I have a better chance of changing the way our future country will be, because they're the future leaders. You know, the old guys that I talk to in my other work at the university and, you know, in policy making, they're a little old, and, you know, their minds are a little set. So it's the younger generation I need to talk to and connect with. And that's what I'm doing at the Wenjack Foundation. So the Downie Wenjack Foundation. So that's what I see my role as.
Awesome. Well, we have some youth here who are excited to be meeting you today and hearing a little bit more. I want to give a few shout outs. So some YouTube classrooms who are tuning in have introduced themselves. We've got Mrs. Lowther's group in Baldonnel, British Columbia. We've got some grade 11s in Oshawa, Ontario. Mrs. Ferrari's class in Brampton, Ontario. We've got another group in Langley, British Columbia. Where else? We got high school students in Oshawa, Ajax, more students in Kirkland, Lake Ontario. We've got someone joining in from Quebec. So we have lots of awesome classrooms joining in live. Feel free to send us in some questions. We're going to work those in, but let's meet some of our camera classrooms. So let's see, where should we start? Let's go to Winnipeg, Manitoba. We've got Mr. Blondeau's class hanging out with us. Let me get that microphone turned on. How are we doing, Winnipeg?
Doing great. Thank you very much.
All right, awesome. Good to see you, Manitoba. Who's got a question? All right, someone come up nice front and center for us, nice and loud.
What happened to your parents?
Oh, okay, that's a great question. What happened to my parents was they had a lot of issues with, there was a lot of just family dysfunction, and eventually they couldn't be parents anymore. And so they had to give me and my brothers up to the system. And I don't think it was their fault. It was just life was very hard for us because the way that we had lost our land as Métis people, it just it broke their heart, I think, you know. So that's what happened to my mom and my dad.
All right. So we were just in Manitoba, and now through the magic of technology, we're going to jump back to Ontario. New Liskeard, we have some high school students hanging out with Mrs. Plant. They're joining us as a lunch group. Let me get that microphone turned on. How are you in Ontario?
We're from New Liskeard. We have a lot of.
Oh, go ahead. You're just in twice, so there might be a little feedback, but that's fine.
We have a lot of
Okay, maybe there's going to be a lot of feedback. Mrs. Pont, if you don't mind, actually, let me try the other microphone, see if that one's working. Try now with the question again. Oh, darn. If you want to type that question into me, just because you're in twice, it's making a little bit of feedback for us. So when you do talk, it's going to kind of do that for us. So if you type that question in via the chat, I know your teacher knows where it is. I'll come back and we'll get that question from you. So a slight pause. We are going to go now to Courtenay, British Columbia. So out on Vancouver Island, let's get Mrs. Costellan's group, some fifth graders hanging out with us. Let's get that microphone turned on. How are we doing, BC?
Good.
All right, I can see someone front and center. What you got for us?
How has your past affected like how you are now?
My past affects me in a lot of ways, actually. I have a lot of injuries from my life, so I have to really take care of my health now. I have to make sure that I walk with my wife. I have to like eat properly. I can't overeat. And I go around and I talk to people across the country about like what happened to me, and I try to help change policy around homelessness with the government and service providers. So how people offer shelter to homeless people. I do a lot of that. And then I teach my family's history at university to kids. And so I use all those elements of my past as a strength now, you know. I don't look at myself and say, poor me. I look at myself and say, what can I do to use that experience to help other people? And that's what I do.
Yeah, and Jesse, you really are you are a strong symbol of resilience. And I think that's, like you just said, a lot of people do think, woe is me. But it is such a great story. And I'm so glad that we're able to share it with the students today. And Mrs. Plant's group managed to get me a question into the chat. And so they say, hi, we have a number of students who are Temiskaming First Nation, where your grandmother had family. And they're wondering if you ever come north to speak to students about your journey.
Oh my gosh, I was just there like a month and a half ago, and I'm coming up in the summer, so I can probably set something up. And I love those people, like the Kings, the Polsons, the Mackenzies. They're all my family. And I have family from all through that region, Inglehart, Temiskaming, uh, Cobalt, all through there, New Liskeard. And so, yeah, I'd be honored to come up and speak to students there and, share a little more and meet all my cousins.
All right, very cool. Thanks for sending that question in. And don't forget, you can use that chat bar to send us a couple more. We're going to go to Flin Flon, Manitoba this time. Mr. Dillon has some high school students hanging out with him. Let me get that microphone turned on. Oh, Mr. Dillon, I'm going to need you to unmute for me because you muted it when you came in. There they are. How are you doing, Flin Flon?
So I have a group of grade 9s and 10s. They're a little shy in high school, so I'm going to pose a question. In our English class, we were going to read your book. What is one of the stories out of the book that you can talk to these kids about?
One of the stories. Okay. One of the stories in there, it's one of my favorites. It's when I was taken out of my family unit, Métis-Cree people from northern Saskatchewan, and I was placed in Brampton, and I always missed my mom. I was just a little kid, and I missed my mom and my dad and our family, and I was with my grandparents, and they were my grandparents. They're all old, and they just weren't my mom and dad. So my friend called me over to his house to take care of some robin's eggs. His family had a robin that had laid eggs in the backyard, and he left me out there with the eggs, and I stole them. And I put them in my sock, and I ran home, and I fell, and I shattered the eggs, and I felt so ashamed at what I did. I threw the eggs and the broken eggs in my sock in the sewer, and then I hid in my grandparents' house. And he came with his mom and his dad, and I got in big trouble from my grandparents, but I didn't tell anybody what I had done or why I did it, sorry. And it wasn't until years later when I'm writing the book that I finally told the world. I stole those eggs because they reminded me of my mom and my dad and our family back in Saskatchewan, because the mother, Robin, cared for those eggs, and I wanted that. And I was actually jealous of those eggs. And, a couple days ago, actually, I got a call from my buddy who asked me to watch the eggs. He's now a grown man. He's an MPP in Ottawa, oddly enough. And I said, man, I'm sorry about those eggs. We're grown men. I'm 43, he's 43. And he's like, yeah, it's okay, Jess. I understand now, and so that's one big full circle that's come from writing the book. And that's one of the stories.
All right. That's an awesome story. And obviously I wish our group in Flin Flon good luck reading the book. And I hope lots of great discussion comes out of it. That's awesome. So I want to jump online. There's even more classes joining us. We've got Edith Rogers in Edmonton, the school. We've got, let's see, Mrs. Provost group joining us. We've got Mrs. Lowther. And so Mrs. Lowther's class in BC, they sent in a couple questions. Let's see. They're wondering about where you were born, and then did your parents go to residential school?
I was born in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. It's in the north of Saskatoon by a couple hours. And my dad didn't go to residential school. His people are Algonquin Scot. His mother came from Temiskaming in Northern Ontario, and her father went to residential school in 1915 to 1921. But that trauma that happened to him, great-grandpa David, trailed through my family line down to my father through my grandmother. And so it had a devastating effect because it really limited the way that people raise their children. You're taught that as a kid, even if you're not aware of it, just by being taken care of by your parents. You're learning to be a parent later in life by the way that they treat you. And when my grandpa was taken to residential school, he just wasn't taught that, and so that trickled down through my father's line. And on my mom's side, we have a different history of dispossession. The way our lands were taken, we were Métis rebel fighters. We fought against Canada, and we were stripped of our land. So there was a different line of trauma there. So we didn't even have education on my mom's side until my mom's generation. So there wasn't the scoop to take her to residential school during her lifetime. I know that some of her cousins went, and some of their children went. So people of my generation in Saskatoon, and they went up until 96, I think. It was like very recent. It's not that long ago, so.
All right. Well, it's always great to connect with a fellow Saskatchewaner. I was born in Moosomin, Saskatchewan, so right near the North Dakota border. And on that note, we are going to slide over to a classroom from Saskatchewan. So we have Mrs. Hansen has some students, some high school students in Priestville, Saskatchewan. Let me get that microphone turned on. There it is. How are you doing, Saskatchewan?
Good.
We're ready for you.
My question was it tough to open up about your past in your book, knowing that thousands of people would read it? Were you like embarrassed or ashamed of your past in any way?
Yeah, it was terrifying, right? Being, coming from where I did on the streets and whatever, I used to think that fighting and all that stuff took courage, and writing this book took way more courage than that, putting it all out there. And I had to be confident that it would reach people, and that kind of overrode my fear. And I think it's one of the first times in my life where I actually was brave, and so, yeah, there's some things that I'm ashamed of. Sure. Yeah, I did a lot of bad stuff and I hurt good people, and, I wish I could take it all back. But I think in me sharing and trying to help other people, that's my way of learning from what I went through and giving back and doing it in a good way and making amends for a lot of the things that didn't make sense that I was doing a long time ago. So great question. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Mrs. Calder's group is in, let me just double check, Calgary, Alberta. Looks like some grade 7s hanging out with us. How are we doing, grade 7s?
All right, we have a question.
What is intergenerational trauma?
Oh, great question. Okay, so when something really bad happens and you feel like it shocks you, and you can't function properly, you can't make a decision properly, it just takes you back and you feel bad about yourself, or you feel shameful, or you just don't understand. Well, intergenerational trauma is when that happens. There's a big event that happens that makes you feel that way, and then it affects you for the rest of your life. And then you pass that on to your children, and they learn that too. They start to feel scared too. They start to feel ashamed too. And it just continues on and on and on like that. Some people have called it post-traumatic stress disorder. That's inherited. So it's inherited PTSD. And so some people say that it changes the way that your molecules in your body process protein. That's called epigenetics. Other people say it's in the way that we socialize, or the way that our environment and our learning environment changes. So that's what intergenerational trauma is, and it's passed down that way, and it doesn't end unless someone works towards ending it. So with me, part of me ending the intergenerational trauma in my family is to learn my history and share it with others, and try to mend and heal and say that it was okay that my ancestors acted the way they did. They were up against the great odds, and share that with the world and make people learn. And so that helps me heal, because I'm still affected from what happened 50, 75 years ago to my people. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to slide back onto YouTube. We have so many questions coming in via the YouTube live chat from classrooms across Canada. And Mrs. Bain's class at Edith Rogers in Edmonton, Alberta, they've sent a message that my grandmother also went to residential school, so they understand the pain that trickles down. And they're wondering, how did you manage to talk about these painful experiences, and did it help talking about them?
At first, I just was trying to articulate what was going on, right? What had happened to our family, because we didn't have any answers. It was just really chaotic. And as I was starting to like dig through the historical record and ask the elders what happened, a picture became clear of what happened and where people went, and how some went to residential schools, some were dispossessed. And then it started to make sense of what happened in my life. You know, I started to see that I was affected by what happened to them. So that was the process. And now that I share it, I heal, because I hear that, you know, our family wasn't unique. This happened to thousands of Indigenous families and people across the country. And in sharing, what you do is you create kind of like a fellowship, you know, where people can rely on each other and say, you know, encourage each other to share and do well today. And that's really important. That's kind of what we're doing here today, right? Is like we're creating understanding and making sense of trauma that's happening around us, and then sharing about it and saying it's okay. We can move forward now in a good way because we know what happened.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important message. And that's something that the Downie Wenjack Fund is really striving to do, is share the stories of the residential schools and the pain and the suffering that it did cause, because we can't lose those stories. They may be a dark part of our Canadian history, but it's important to tell and share them because we don't want them repeated. And you can really only have true reconciliation through, you know, airing everything. And then that's when true reconciliation can start. So very important message. And again, a lot of courage writing this book and putting it out to Canada. So before we jump back to some camera classrooms, I'm going to put together a double header question from YouTube. So Mrs. Mulville's class is wondering, they're excited to explore your book in their high school class. And they're wondering if you have any recommendations for novels from other Indigenous authors. And then Mrs. Hansen's group is wondering if you're currently working on any more writing now.
Yeah, great questions. I think Inconvenient Indian by Thomas King is a great book that talks about like just Indigenous peoples in Canada and like how we've shown up in popular media. I think another one by Thomas King is all about stories. I think that's the title of it. And he talks about like the importance of stories and how we are all made of story and we have to listen and share. So those are my two recommendations, both Thomas King and I think Marrow Thieves by Cherie Dimaline is a really cool book that talks about like how youth feel now. There's a lot of anxiety towards like the future and the climate and how it affects Indigenous peoples and the rest of society. And so those books are really relevant. Yeah, and I am working on another book. I'm working on my Uncle Ron's story. He appears in my book. My Uncle Ron in the 1970s and 80s was a professional bank robber, but his life is an effect of residential school and how it broke a lot of our men. And he was trying to recapture his manhood through this act, but really he was just broken. And so his story is more dramatic than mine. It'll be more for adults, that book. And I want people left with a question of like, you know, we see lots of incarceration rates with Indigenous peoples now, higher rates. I want people to be left with the question, well, maybe the way that the residential schools damaged generations of Indigenous peoples, maybe the end result is this incarceration rate. And so that's my next book.
All right. Awesome. I mean, I guess I'm thinking about the process. Do you have a process while you're writing? Do you have deadlines you have to hit, or are you free just to kind of let the story go how it comes out?
No, how I write is usually I just get up in the morning and I sit at my desk for about 3 hours. I start at like 6 or 5 in the morning and I write for maybe 4 hours, 4 hours. And then when I start to edit and try to fix my work, that's when I know I'm not sharp anymore, you know, and then I walk away. I walk away and I leave it. I let it rest. It's like cooking a good steak. You got to like sear it on both sides and then walk away and let it cook itself for a while. I return to it the next day or 2 days later, and I can see all my errors and what's good. And then I try to work with that. And I just keep doing that every day, and it accumulates over time. I don't try, and I don't think that I'm writing a book. I was like, okay, maybe if I can just get this one story out, 2 or 3 or 4 pages, or maybe even a paragraph, then that's good for today. And I just keep doing that every day, be consistent about that.
All right, well, we have a little bit of time left to take some more questions from our camera classroom. So boys and girls, I know we've been through once, but if you want to send someone right up front and center to the camera, that'll be my code, my signal that we need to come back and visit your classroom. And from what I see, looks like we need to go to Winnipeg first. So let's go to Winnipeg, Mr. Blondeau's class. Here comes someone.
How do you feel about kids learning about residential schools?
I feel great. I think it's very hopeful. It's very hopeful. When I went to school, I'm like 1,000 years old. We didn't talk about those things, you know? So to hear that you guys are learning and interested, and it just fills my heart so much, you know, that like you guys care enough to learn. And, you know, it's really important. So just makes me so happy.
All right, we're going to jump back to Mrs. Hansen's group. I can see. Let's get that microphone on.
Hello, Jesse. I've got a two-part question here about the title, one from a student and one from myself. How did you land on that particular title? I kind of explained about the allusion to the Phoenix Rising, but did you have any other considerations? And what does it take to burn your life down? That was a question from the students.
Okay, the first one regarding the title, there's another meaning to it. So in one of my opening chapters, I'm with my cookum and we're picking berries by the side of the road, and she's cooking around a fire. That's what's called a maternal hearth in my culture. And so I was taken away from that as a young kid. And so the book is from the ashes of my maternal hearth. And I'm not sure what you mean by burn it all down. Could you clarify, or?
Yep. Yeah, I can, because I thought the title might be related to the illusion of a phoenix rising. So
oh yeah, yes.
You hit rock bottom and then you burn it all down and come back up.
Yeah, so that was me. Basically, I was a part of me needed to pass away, you know, all my resentments, all my like hatred, basically self-hatred for myself as an Indigenous person. All these needed to go away, and I needed to be stripped down to my basic instincts as a person. And when that happened and I realized that I would die living the life that I was living, there was room for growth for the first time. It's almost like when a forest burns down, you know, the aftergrowth grows back stronger than the original forest. And so that had to happen with me personally. And that's where the metaphor of the Phoenix Rising comes out of for the title.
All right, Alberta, I can see someone waiting patiently for us. I'm going to turn your mic on, Ms. Calder's class.
How can we, as students, support reconciliation?
Well, I think, and I heard one of my elders say it, the best way to support reconciliation is to get to know your local First Nations, you know, make connections with them, you know, see what they're up to, you know, maybe have a hockey game against them or a baseball game, or, you know, send letters, do something to get to know their other youth, because there are other Indigenous youth, you know, and share your stories with them, share your own family stories with them, listen to theirs. And that exchange actually is what we need in our country among youth, is to get to know local First Nations in their area.
All right, Mr. Dillon's class, I'll pop the microphone on to see if you guys have a follow-up for us. I've got it on already, Mr. Dillon.
struggling in their life right now, as you as a teenager, what advice would you give to a teenager right
now? That's a tough question. It's been so long. I'm so old. What I would say is the main thing that I believe in relationships, right? I really do. I believe in relationships and trust. And so if you're a youth, you know, find someone that you can trust, that's like a peer mentor or maybe a guidance counselor. I really wish I would have done that when I was a kid. We had this really old guidance counselor and I didn't feel like I could relate to them and that I could trust them. And I think that maybe that's an obligation of the school system to provide guidance counselors that are more of the age of the kids that they're counseling, you know, so peer mentorship is really important because you are who you surround yourself with. And you really, really have to take that into account during your teen years because they're such formative years. You turn into who you hang around with. So that would be my one piece of advice, and also to reach out, you know, so in that silence or where people are struggling, you know, in their youth because they're afraid, that stops the relationships, positive relationships from happening with mentors. And so, yeah, don't be afraid to reach out to people in the school and people that you trust.
All right, I think that's excellent advice, even from an old guy. I think that's really good advice. Mrs. Gustalin's group will give you guys one last question. Your microphone is on.
What are you gonna do next?
What I'm gonna do next? I'm thinking I'm gonna join the Maple Leafs. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. No, I'm probably gonna be a father, you know. I'm probably gonna be a father and you know, take my kid to hockey practice and continue to teach and continue to do stuff like this, write more books, talk in more classrooms, speak at more events, and just be a good relative to everyone around me.
All right. Well, Jesse, a huge thank you. Thank you so much for being so open with us today, for sharing with the students, for answering their questions. You know, today being Gord's birthday, I can't think of a better person to chat with us today as an ambassador and to help carry on his legacy. I have no doubt, you know, his story impacted you, and I have no doubt that you sharing his story with him had an impact on him as well. So thanks for what you're doing, and thanks for what you're going to continue to do. And of course, good luck with the CBC Reads. That's pretty awesome, and I can imagine you're looking forward to the defenses and
Yeah.
what comes with it.
Yes, yes. Thank you for having me. It was a wonderful experience, and I hope that we create a good Wekuduan here, good relations.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, boys and girls, thank you so much in your classrooms. Those who are on camera with us, those who are on YouTube across Canada, thanks for joining us. Don't forget that, you know, you can do something, and that's what it really is all about. Hear the stories, learn about what happened, but then do something. Then we can have some reconciliation, meaningful reconciliation. So again, Jesse, thank you so much. Good luck with everything. We look forward to a future connection. And the last thing I'll do is turn the microphones on, and boys and girls, a big goodbye and thank you to Jesse. And then we'll sign off for today. So here we go, boys and girls. A big goodbye and thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone. Looking forward to future connections. Everyone have a great day. Have a great week.